Welcome to this week's Sunday School lesson. Today's lesson is entitled Dorcas, Lydia, and Phoebe, Faithful Servants, and it's for November the 24th, 2024. Now, quick note, today's lesson is taken from the Radiant Life Adult Sunday School series published by the Assemblies of God. You can order your own copy, which I recommend at 855-642-2011. And I am not compensated for that endorsement, nor am I an employee of the publishing company. Now, talking about Dorcas, Acts 9:36 through 37. Now there was in Joppa a disciple named Tabitha, which translated means Dorcas. She was full of good works and acts of charity. In those days she became ill and died, and when they had washed her, they laid her in an upper room. Verses 38 through 39. Since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples, hearing that Peter was there, sent two men to him, urging him, "Please come to us without delay." So Peter rose and went with them, and when they arrived, they took him to the upper room. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other garments that Dorcas had made while she was with them. Dorcas and Tabitha means gazelle. Lydda is only 12 miles away from Joppa. Peter, who was in Lydda, was within walking distance of Joppa. Dorcas was the first person raised from the dead in the early church. Jesus had raised the dead, and of course, Jesus was resurrected. Now, in my opinion, there is a difference between being raised from the dead and resurrected. Being raised from the dead is not permanent. Resurrection is permanent, and we get our new bodies at resurrection. Dorcas showing kindness to the widows and garments was not an occasional thing. It is obvious that this was a common thing for Dorcas. Acts 9:40 through 43. And Peter put them all outside and knelt down and prayed. And turning to the body, he said, "Tabitha, arise." And she opened her eyes, and she saw Peter. She sat up, and he gave her his hand and raised her up. Then calling to the saints and widows, he presented her alive. And it became known throughout all Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. And he stayed in Joppa for many days with one Simon, a tanner. Now both Peter and Elisha cleared the room and had privacy when they prayed for the dead to be raised. Peter followed the example of Jesus when Jesus said, "Damsel, arise," when he raised the young girl. Peter spoke a similar command. Peter had grown in humility. Notice that he went to live in the home of Simon the tanner. Tanners were considered ceremonial unclean, not to mention the smell. My dad told me of the story of working at the tannery here in Chattanooga when he was a young man. He said folks would move away from him on the bus when he got on it after work. After 20 years, it still bothered him. Friends, we need to be a Peter and embrace people regardless of their station in life. Acts 16:9 and 10. In a vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia was standing there, urging him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And when Paul had seen the vision, immediately he sought to go to Macedonia, concluding that God had called him to preach the gospel to them. Paul has a vision at Troas, which is a seaport city near the ancient city of Troy. It is the call of God to minister at Macedonia. May God grant all of us an ear to hear His direction in our life. May we all understand that obedience is better than sacrifice. Friends, go and do the work that God has called you to do. Acts 16:11 and 12. So, after setting sail from Troas, we made a direct voyage to Samothrace, and the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is a leading city in the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this city some days. Acts 16:13 and 14. And on the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate to the riverside, where we supposed there was a place of prayer. And we sat down and spoke to the women who had come together. One who heard us was a woman named Lydia from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple goods, who was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what was said by Paul. Now, there doesn't appear to be a large Jewish population at Philippi because they did not have a synagogue. Forming a synagogue required 10 Jewish males in a city. They only had a place of prayer and not a synagogue, so they did not have 10 grown Jewish men. Now, Lydia was a seller of purple cloth. This dye came from the shellfish murex and some of it came from the root of a special plant. This garment, purple pigment, was highly valued and associated with wealth and prestige. Lydia was a prominent person in the community. Acts 16 and 15. And after she was baptized and her household as well, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay." And she prevailed upon us. Acts 16 and 40. So they went out of the prison and visited Lydia. And when they had seen the brothers, they encouraged them and departed. Lydia was a woman of considerable means, and that's evidenced by the size of her house. This house was ample enough to accommodate 4 men as well as her own household. The phrase prevailed upon us indicates she did much more than just politely invite them. She urged them. She would not take no for an answer. And we need to be hospitable like Lydia. Phoebe, Romans 16:1 and 2. I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a servant of the Lord at Cenchreae, that you may welcome her in the Lord in a way worthy of the saints, to help her in whatever she may need from you, for she has been a patron of many and of myself as you well. The word in the original diakonon is often translated as deacon. It is clear here that Phoebe held a prominent position in the early church. Paul is trusting her to carry the letter, and she had a position in the local church in Kankara, which is a seaport a few miles south of Corinth. Some churches have women deacons and some churches don't. Personally, I have no problem with women deacons and women pastors. I see women in positions of authority in the Bible. But friends, if you don't feel comfortable with women pastors or deacons, don't go to a church with a woman in leadership. But I'm not going to debate anyone over it. One thing is clear, though. In the original language, Phoebe is called a deacon at that church. Well, friends, I want to thank you for spending a few minutes with us. If you want to get in touch with me, you can call me on my cell phone, 423-355-3859. You can email me, DonnieBryson@gmail.com, or you can go to the ministry website, www.gospelmailbox.org. Well, friends, good Lord willing, I'll be back with you next weekend.